When you go silent, it feels unnatural at first. Every instinct inside you wants to explain yourself, defend your intentions, or prove that you still care. You replay conversations in your head, imagining the perfect message that would finally make her understand what she lost. But the truth is, words rarely change emotions. Action, or the absence of it, does. Silence is not retreat, silence is control. And the moment you choose it, you stop playing the role she expects and step into a position of quiet strength. Most men believe that staying silent means they've lost. They think if they don't reach out, they're giving up their chance. In reality, nonstop communication is what drains attraction. Over explaining signals insecurity, chasing signals fear of loss, reacting emotionally tells her that she still controls your state of mind. Silence flips that script completely. It shows that you trust yourself enough to walk away without drama, without pleading, without collapsing under emotional pressure. That kind of self control is rare and it's deeply felt, even if it's never acknowledged out loud. When you stop talking, you also stop feeding the emotional narrative she has built to justify leaving. As long as you're texting, calling, or checking in, she can tell herself, I made the right decision. He's still here, still available. Your presence becomes predictable, comfortable, easy to ignore. Silence disrupts that comfort. It removes reassurance, it creates space. And in that space, her mind starts filling in the blanks on its own. Questions appear, doubt creeps in, and curiosity slowly replaces certainty. Silence forces reflection because there is no distraction. There's no message to analyze, no reaction to judge, no emotional spike to ride. Instead, there is emptiness where your attention used to be. That absence is powerful because it mirrors loss. She starts wondering why you stopped trying, why you didn't fight harder, why you didn't collapse the way she expected you to. And that confusion is the first crack in the story she told herself about being better off without you. The strongest men don't announce their boundaries, they live them. Silence is a boundary. It says, I will not chase someone who chose to walk away. It says, I value my time, energy, and self respect. You're not punishing her. You're not playing games. You're simply choosing not to invest where you're no longer valued. That decision alone communicates more strength than any emotional speech ever could. There's also a deeper psychological shift that happens when you go quiet. You stop outsourcing your validation. When you're constantly reaching out, part of you is still hoping for reassurance that she'll respond warmly, that she'll miss you, that she'll change her mind. Silence cuts that dependency. It forces you to sit with yourself. And in doing so, you begin reclaiming your emotional center. You stop reacting to her mood and start responding to your own standards. From her perspective, your silence feels like unpredictability, not in a chaotic way, but in a grounded, unsettling way. She thought she knew how this would go. She expected messages. She expected emotion. She expected motion. She expected resistance. When none of that shows up, it shakes her sense of control. And control, whether conscious or not, plays a huge role in attraction. The moment she realizes she no longer has emotional access to you, her perception of your value changes. Silence also removes you from the position of the option. As long as you stay in touch, you remain accessible. You become something she can return to whenever she feels lonely or uncertain. Silence closes that door. It creates consequence. And consequences create clarity. She can no longer assume you'll be there when it's convenient. That realization alone often triggers regret. Not because she suddenly understands love, but because she feels the weight of what she may have permanently lost. Another truth most people overlook is that silence protects you. Emotional conversations after a breakup often reopen wounds. They keep you stuck in the past. They prolong hope when what you need is healing. Silence gives you the space to grieve privately, rebuild quietly, and regain perspective. It stops you from saying things you can't take back. It stops you from lowering your value in moments of weakness. And over time, it restores your sense of dignity. As days turn into weeks, something subtle begins to happen. The emotional charge fades. You start thinking more clearly. You remember who you were before the relationship consumed your focus. You reconnect with routines, goals, and ambitions that had nothing to do with her. This inner shift changes your energy. And even if she never reaches out, you become stronger, more grounded, less reactive. That alone is a win regardless of the outcome. But if she does come back, it's often because your silence forced her to feel the consequences of her decision, not through punishment, not through manipulation, but through reality. She experiences what life feels like without your presence, your attention, your stability. And sometimes that experience is what finally brings understanding. Silence doesn't beg for recognition, it allows recognition to arrive on its own. When access is easy, value is invisible. Human nature takes familiarity for granted, especially in relationships. As long as you were present, available, and emotionally reachable, she could measure your value only in comfort, not in absence. The moment you remove access, everything changes. What once felt ordinary now feels missing. What was predictable becomes rare, and what was taken lightly begins to carry weight. Time is the great revealer because it strips away emotion driven decisions and exposes reality. In the early stages after a breakup, excitement and relief often mask the true cost of separation. Freedom feels fresh, options seem endless. She tells herself she's finally doing what's best for her. But as days pass and novelty fades, time removes the illusion. Silence combined with time creates a vacuum where truth rushes in. At first, she may enjoy the quiet, no expectations, no responsibility, no emotional labor. But slowly, subtle moments start triggering memory. A song, a place, a routine you shared. These reminders don't hit all at once, they accumulate. And because you're no longer there to balance them with new interactions, they echo louder. Your absence becomes noticeable not during big moments, but in the small, everyday ones where your presence used to live. Removing access forces comparison. New people are exciting at first, but excitement fades quickly when it lacks depth. She begins to measure conversations, consistency, and emotional safety against what she once had. Not because she wants to, but because the mind naturally compares past stability to present uncertainty. And the longer you stay unavailable, the more clearly those comparisons expose what was lost. What hurts most isn't losing a person, it's losing how that person made you feel. When access is removed, emotional memory sharpens. Your calm presence, your reliability, your leadership, the way you showed up when things were hard. These qualities don't scream for attention in the moment, but they leave an imprint over time. And once they're gone, their absence is deeply felt. Time also eliminates the justifications she used to leave. In the beginning, reasons feel convincing because they're emotionally charged, but distance weakens those narratives. Without conflict, without ongoing interaction to reinforce them, excuses start collapsing. She begins to question whether the problems were as severe as she thought or whether emotions clouded judgment. And when there's no contact from you, those questions have nowhere to hide. Your silence during this period is crucial. It allows time to work without interference. If you reach out, you reset the emotional clock. You give her relief. You remind her she still has access. And access kills reflection. When access is gone, time does what no argument ever could. It teaches. It forces her to live with her decision instead of emotionally outsourcing comfort back to you. As weeks go by, something deeper emerges: accountability. Not guilt, but awareness. She starts recognizing patterns, not just in you, but in herself. She sees what you walked away from and why. And even if she never admits it, the realization settles quietly. Regret doesn't arrive as a dramatic moment. It arrives as a slow understanding that something valuable was mishandled. Meanwhile, your distance reframes your identity in her mind. You are no longer the man who tried to convince her. You become the man who respected himself enough to let go. That shift alone elevates your perceived value. Scarcity does not create attraction, but it reveals it. And by removing access, you allow her to see you without the noise of constant availability. Time also works on you. With access removed, your emotional clarity improves. You stop obsessing over outcomes, you detach from needing validation, and as you regain stability, you reclaim your sense of self. This internal growth changes the energy you carry, whether she ever sees it or not. And if she does, it's unmistakable. You're no longer waiting, you're moving forward. The irony is that the more complete your life becomes without her, the more undeniable your value becomes in hindsight. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because your silence allowed growth instead of stagnation. Time magnifies that growth. And if she looks back, she doesn't see a man frozen in loss, she sees someone who evolved. Regret doesn't come from missing texts or unanswered calls. It comes from recognizing the permanence of absence. When enough time passes and access is still gone, reality sets in. She understands that the door she walked through may no longer be open, and that realization carries weight, not panic but gravity. There comes a moment when you stop asking questions that will never give you peace. You stop seeking explanations that only reopen wounds. You stop needing her to validate your pain or justify her decision. That moment is when her emotional certainty begins to collapse. Regret does not start when she misses you. It starts when she realizes you no longer need anything from her. Closure is often misunderstood. Most people believe closure comes from a final conversation, a clear explanation, or mutual understanding. In reality, those conversations rarely satisfy. They prolong attachment and keep emotional doors open. When you stop seeking closure from her, you quietly reclaim authority over your own emotional state, and that shift is deeply felt, even if it's never spoken. At first, she may interpret your silence as indifference or pride. She may assume you're trying to be strong or play a role. But as time passes and you remain unmoved, the realization sets in. You're not waiting, you're not hoping, you're not stuck. And that realization creates discomfort because it removes her role in your emotional narrative. She is no longer the center of your healing. You are. Most people underestimate how much power comes from emotional disengagement. As long as you seek closure, you signal that she still holds answers you can't give yourself. That dynamic keeps you emotionally subordinate. When you let go of that need, you flip the hierarchy. You become the one who decided the conversation was over, not because you didn't care, but because you cared enough about yourself to stop bleeding in public. Her regret begins quietly, not as longing, but as confusion. She expected you to ask why. She expected you to challenge her decision. She expected resistance. When none of that happens, she's forced to confront a new possibility. Maybe she didn't leave someone broken. Maybe she left someone strong. That thought unsettles her because it contradicts the narrative she used to justify walking away. When you don't seek closure, you also remove emotional leverage. She no longer has the comfort of knowing she can explain herself whenever she wants. She no longer has the reassurance that you're still emotionally invested enough to listen. That loss of leverage changes the power dynamic. And power dynamics, whether acknowledged or not, heavily influence attraction and regret. There's a psychological discomfort that arises when someone walks away without demanding answers. It leaves unfinished emotional business. The mind wants resolution. When you don't provide an opportunity for it, she is left alone with unresolved feelings. And those unresolved feelings grow louder over time, not because you push them, but because you refuse to carry them for her. This is where regret takes root. Not in missing your voice, but in missing the emotional certainty she once had. She no longer knows how you feel. She no longer knows if you'd even care if she reached out. And uncertainty is uncomfortable. It forces introspection. It forces her to question whether the decision truly brought peace or simply delayed discomfort. Your silence communicates something subtle but powerful. You respect her choice. You don't chase someone who chooses to leave. That level of self respect is rare, and it leaves an imprint. She may not like it. She may resist it, but she cannot ignore it. It reframes you in her mind as someone who values himself enough to walk away with dignity. Meanwhile, something important is happening within you. By not seeking closure, you stop reopening emotional wounds. You stop reliving the breakup through repeated conversations. You allow healing to happen naturally, without interruption. This creates emotional stability, and stability changes how you carry yourself, how you think, act, and move through the world. As your emotional center stabilizes, you begin to see the relationship more clearly. You stop romanticizing the past. You recognize patterns you ignored. You understand what you tolerated and why. This clarity doesn't come from discussion, it comes from distance. And distance is only possible when you stop seeking answers from the person who hurt you. If she ever reaches out, it's often because the lack of closure becomes too heavy. She wants to know where she stands. She wants reassurance that she still matters. She wants to resolve the discomfort your silence created. But by that time, you're no longer operating from need, you're operating from choice. And that difference changes everything. Even if she never reaches out, the result is the same. You regain control of your emotional life. You are no longer waiting for permission to move forward. You no longer need her words to validate your experience. That independence is the true closure, and it's something no one can take away from you. While silence looks passive on the outside, it is anything but inactive on the inside. The period where you are no longer speaking is the period where transformation begins. Most people assume silence means waiting, but real growth happens when you stop waiting and start rebuilding. And this is where everything shifts, not just for you, but for how she eventually perceives you, whether she ever admits it or not. At first, growth doesn't feel empowering, it feels empty. The routines you shared are gone. The daily messages are gone. The emotional anchor you leaned on has disappeared. That emptiness is uncomfortable, and many people rush to fill it with distractions or rebounds. But when you resist that urge and sit with the silence, you give yourself space to evolve. You begin asking better questions, not about her, but about yourself. You start noticing how much of your identity was tied to the relationship, your schedule, your priorities, your emotional rhythms. Silence exposes these dependencies, and once exposed, they can be corrected. You begin reclaiming time that was once spent overthinking, waiting, or reacting. That time becomes fuel for discipline, structure, and purpose. As days turn into weeks, small changes compound. You wake up earlier, you train harder, you focus longer, you become more intentional with your energy, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because pain has sharpened your awareness. Discomfort forces clarity, and clarity leads to action. This is the phase where you quietly rebuild the foundation of your life. What makes this transformation powerful is that it's unannounced. There are no updates, no posts, no signals. She doesn't see the work being done. And that's the point. Growth that happens in silence carries a different weight. It's not performative, it's real. And real growth changes how you move, speak, and respond to the world. Emotionally, you become steadier. You stop reacting to memories with the same intensity. Triggers lose their power. You don't suppress emotion, you process it. You allow yourself to feel without letting feelings dictate your behavior. This emotional mastery is rare, and it shows up in subtle ways: calmer conversations, clearer decisions, stronger boundaries. As you grow, your standards rise. You stop romanticizing potential and start valuing consistency. You recognize what you will and won't tolerate. And most importantly, you stop negotiating your self respect. This internal shift is irreversible. Once you've built it, you don't go back to chasing validation or shrinking yourself to be chosen. If she ever looks back or reaches out, she senses this immediately, not through words, but through energy. You're not the same man who was left behind. You're more grounded, more composed, less eager to please. And that difference is unsettling because it disrupts her expectations. She expected you to still be emotionally available. She expected familiarity. Instead, she encounters growth. This is where regret deepens, not because she wants you back necessarily, but because she realizes she no longer has access to the version of you she once knew. The man who waited, the man who adapted, the man who prioritized the relationship over himself. That man is gone, and loss feels heavier when what's lost cannot be recovered. Even if she never reappears, the outcome remains the same. You win. You become someone who doesn't crumble under loss, who doesn't chase after rejection, who doesn't abandon himself for love. That strength becomes part of your identity, and it influences every area of your life, work, friendships, future relationships. Silence also teaches patience. You learn to sit with uncertainty without reacting. You learn that not every feeling requires action. This skill alone separates emotionally mature men from emotionally reactive ones, and once developed, it becomes a lifelong advantage. There's a quiet confidence that emerges when you know you survived something that once threatened to break you. You no longer fear abandonment the same way. You trust yourself to handle discomfort. That trust changes how you show up with others. You're less anxious, less controlling, and more authentic. Growth during silence makes you unrecognizable because it reshapes your internal framework. You're no longer defined by how someone treats you. You're defined by how you treat yourself. And that shift is permanent. In the end, silence is not about hoping she notices your absence. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to be noticed. And if she does look back, she doesn't see a man waiting, she sees a man who moved forward. That realization is what turns curiosity into regret and regret into respect.